Welcome back, basketball fans. We are coming at you live from Thomas and Mack Center in Las Vegas for NBA Summer League 2022. So glad that you guys have decided to join us here on this live podcast. We're glad to be back in Vegas for this second straight year covering the NBA basketball that is transpiring here in the desert. It's pretty hot, and the action is even hotter inside Thomas and Mack. So today, me and my guest here, Ali Shafiq, a part of the NTC team, are diving into a couple of news stories that have broken here over the last 12 hours or so. So we're going to dive into this here, Ali, get into a couple of news stories, get into the nitty-gritty of things, and try to give you guys the scoop, the breakdown, the little details of what happened today with two of the biggest names in the NBA world. So, Ali, if you're ready, I'm ready.
I'm ready.
Let's take a look at this, man, because it's pretty interesting news. It's going to have a big impact on not only these two teams, but the NBA in general for, I'm sure, many years to come. So to dive into our first topic of the day, we are looking at James Harden and his pretty interesting decision to take quite the pay cut. This is something we haven't seen of this caliber since, I want to say, the Big Three era in Miami, where those guys came together to accomplish the mission of winning a championship, which they did. And they all decided to take a pay cut in order to really just get these guys in the same team to make it work. But in Harden's case, in the Sixers, it's to give the team greater flexibility in order to build a roster that can truly compete for a championship. Ali, in their last playoff appearance here in 2022, they had quite the disappointing out to the Miami Heat in round 2.
They did.
They wanted to retool the roster, and it was obvious that one of their biggest weaknesses was depth.
Yep.
They were a little bit lacking there behind Harden, behind Harris, Joel Embiid. So they went out and made a few moves here. We'll get to those in a second. But the specifics of his pay cut, it's going to be about $15 million as reported, which takes his contract down to from about $47 million, which it was going to be before that player option, down to about $32 million. And the impact of that, which is pretty huge, is there's a certain line that the Sixers want to stay below, and that's the luxury, not the luxury tax, but the luxury apron. If they're below that line, that gives them extra flexibility to use that mid-level exception, the max mid-level exemption, which allowed them to give a 3-year, $30+ million deal to PJ Tucker. Now, that in itself is very impactful because we saw that in that series against Miami where they were eliminated. PJ is the ultimate Swiss Army knife, a stretch four, a guy that can get you rebounds, bang with the best of them, down low, space it out to the corners, just be a bulldog. And that's something that the Sixers, I'm sure, were a little bit lacking, and they're very happy to have that there in the locker room. So initial impressions, Ali, what do you think of this move to get PJ Tucker? And not only that, but Harden just taking a back seat here when it comes to his contract and just allowing the Sixers to have that extra flexibility in order to build out a roster that really has a legitimate chance to win a championship and just to make good on the entire process that's been transpiring in Philadelphia for quite a few years now.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. I would say that you touched on the playoff disappointments from last year. Unfortunately, what we saw transpire was their roster felt very incomplete, and you touched on the depth, but what I'll say is we saw a lot of one-way players, whether it was from the offensive side or the defensive side. We didn't have a lot of two-way players on that roster, and that was the unfortunate downfall of their season. And with PJ Tucker, you add one of the best two-way guys in the league. You add, like you said, a Swiss Army knife guy. But most importantly, you add a sense of toughness and durability. You know, PJ Tucker, last year he did miss some time, but he had the sense of durability, shot making. And what I hope to see in Miami, he kind of rediscovered dribble handoffs, a little bit of creation out of tertiary, being attacking closeouts, things of that nature.
Yep.
Slipping a DHO here and there, hitting a floater, and I hope that isn't taken out of his game completely, because as we saw in Houston, he was primarily, I'm stationed in the corners. That is my assignment. I'm going to hit threes, and that is it. And I'm going to defend. And clearly he's going to bring that skill set to Philadelphia, and it's going to help a ton. But I do think that added variety is also not taken away from his last year in Miami. In terms of taking a step back, and the reason why they were able to make this move was Harden was able to take a step back and realize that a lot of players at his age, at his caliber, I mean, he is an all-NBA, all-time great guard, and some guys don't realize that, yes, I've taken a step back. Yes, this is the new reality. Maybe I need to, realize this, internalize this, and make some changes that actually create opportunities for my team, and not take the full salary. And that's exactly what he did. And it's nice to see that, to see someone like James Harden, take a step back, take stock of his career, and understand that, hey, I'm in a new place, in a new phase of his career. Just like Tim Duncan took a few pay cuts. Dirk Nowitzki took a few pay cuts.
Yes.
You touched on Miami Heat, the big three, taking a few pay cuts as well. And I think that that's a huge decision on his part. And I think they did a phenomenal job. Obviously, Morey and ownership and Harden were always on the same page.
Yes, obviously they are on the same page, and they have a similar mission here, and that's very apparent in this move by Harden. And it's one thing to say that you're committed to winning, but it's another to show it.
Yep.
And not only in the way he's going to play. I'm sure there's been also reports about him taking these workouts very seriously in the summertime and working with Sam Cassell, working with Maxey, working with these guys just to hone their games to make sure they're completely dialed in 110% when it comes to playoff time. But also in this move in the offseason that, it's not an on-court decision. This is off-court. This is his. It affects his personal life. It affects things off the court. So the fact that he demonstrated that in this move is very respectable. I'm sure a lot of people out there are not a huge fan of Harden for a variety of reasons, but you can't deny that this is a move that you have to respect, and it's definitely going to put Philadelphia in a better position to win. And they made a few other moves that we're going to touch on here in a second. Yep. But one last point on P.J. Tucker, when it comes to his impact on the game, it's very apparent. And then with the Sixers grabbing him, I think they were so determined to get him, not only because of the things you mentioned, the spacing the floor, the grabbing the rebounds, but it's also addition by subtraction. And what I mean by that is Miami doesn't have the luxury of having him on that roster anymore. They paid him $30 million over 3 years. Now, P.J. Tucker is going to be 40 here pretty soon. This is an older guy in the league. That's not to be overlooked. The fact that they gave him that much money tells me that, yes, you're paying him for the impact that he's about to have for this Philadelphia team that needed that toughness a little bit. But the fact that Miami no longer has that luxury, that is a serious thing to take into consideration. As of today, which we're recording this podcast on July 8th, Miami has not been able to plug that hole at the 4 position. So if they go into the season as constructed, they are missing a vital piece, and they are downgraded as a result of this move. So kudos to Philadelphia, Daryl Morey, for making this move. It weakens a conference opponent. It weakens the opponent that they went against in the playoffs here just this spring and came up short against. So from that perspective, just a one-on-one perspective, it puts them in a better position.
Yep.
I haven't seen many people comment on that yet, but it's something that came to me earlier today. That's a big deal.
Absolutely.
Like if you snatch a vital asset, not a superstar, let's be clear, this isn't a tier 1 player, but still a very important player, it puts you arguably over the top of that team because you have the luxury of taking advantage of all his gifts, everything he brings to the basketball court, and your rival team just simply doesn't. That's a huge factor to take into consideration here.
Absolutely. And to be frank, I feel like the 76ers in general, when you take a step back and see how they've constructed their team this offseason, they took into account the fact that their weakness was, like we touched on, having too many one-way guys. They go out and go sign Daniel House, obviously P.J. Tucker. And they filled out their rotation. And, obviously trading for DeAnthony Melton as well. That was a phenomenal trade. They got great value for him. Another two-way guy. So now you see the outline of a rotation with full two-way guys who can substitute, who can shoot, who can attack off the dribble, who can be in a variety of spots in the court. And I think that's really going to open up a lot for Embiid. We see Embiid coming off a phenomenal MVP caliber year. And that was around a flawed roster. Now think about him in a roster that is suited to his needs, his desires, and his game. I think he's going to take another level as well.
Absolutely. To get back to those couple of players you touched on, Daniel House and, bringing in not only him, but DeAnthony Melton via trade. I mean, those are two very impactful players here. Just like P.J. Tucker, these aren't all-stars. These aren't superstars that could completely change the team on their own. But it's the flexibility in year 2 that stands out to me. In 23-24, DeAnthony Melton at $8 million, non-guaranteed. And then you look at Daniel House at that $4.3 million player option. If they go through this season and let's say they underperform and they want to go in a different direction, both of those guys can possibly be moving on. House could opt out. Melton, they for whatever reason, if they wanted to, they could cut him. That $8 million is not guaranteed for the full amount before a certain date. So those two moves, I applaud those, not just because they're great role players, but the contract themselves seem to be great values. In the NBA circle, it's been widely reported, widely said that D'Anthony Melton is one of those value guys. This is a one or a two, a guard that you could bring in as a starter if needed. You could bring it off the bench. He can be a ball handler for you. He can be a slasher, attacker. He could do a little bit of everything. Now, he's undersized slightly at 6'2", but he's a very important player for them. And Daniel House fills the similar role.
Absolutely.
The Daryl Morey ties are apparent here. Daniel House, you bring in Melton. I mean, these are guys that, Morey is familiar with. P.J. Tucker. But that's the thing about these executives and coaches sometimes. They bring in familiar faces. We've seen it work against people before. But in this case, it seems to be working out well for them because these guys pretty much bring exactly to the table what Philadelphia needed, that defensive toughness. Just do some of the little things. Embiid will take care of the big things. Harris will do that. Maxey will do that. But the world players will fill in the gaps. And it puts Philadelphia, at least on paper, in a prime position to go out there and get a little bit farther than last year, compete for a championship, and make do on Embiid. Because there's no telling how long Embiid will be an elite player with the knees and his injury issues. But the crazy thing is, right before we went on, we were looking at the contracts. He's at $37 million. Harris is at $37. Embiid is at $33. So until Embiid's extension kicks in next summer, Harris will be the top paid player in this team. Some people will scoff at that, but I guess for one more season, you're getting a pretty good deal on Embiid's contract, a pretty good value. At $33 million, that's crazy to say, but I really do think that this team positioned very well to go out there and make do on the greatness of Embiid, James Harden, and possibly make a deep run here in the playoffs.
Absolutely. I agree.
So with that team discussed, that was a vital decision that was made today, but we also have to look at a second one, and this is going to bring us to the second team, the second player that we want to highlight on this podcast. Guys, we're discussing Damian Lillard, the one and only. He's also known as Dame Dollar, and for I would say about 120 million reasons today, that nickname is very, very much fitting of a guy like Damian Lillard. He's looking at a 2-year, $120 million extension. Ali, I'm sure you remember, it wasn't that long ago, that 5-year contract's worth $120 million was a lot of money. This is a 2-year extension. 120. First impressions of this, because Lillard is not going to be a spring chicken when this kicks in. We're talking about 3 seasons from now. It's going to be, like I said, the $120 million. It brings his total contract to $270 because that adds on to the few years that are already left on his contract. And it's based off of what the salary cap will be in 25-26. So, I mean, Lillard's going to be a pretty, well-aged guy at that point. Is he still going to be? Probably not, right, at that level to make a huge difference for this team? Is it more like a kind of like a lifetime award for Lillard, similar to what we saw with like Kobe Bryant, like just rewarding the time with that team? Like, how do you feel about that deal initially?
To be honest, I think there is a sense of sticker shock that we get when we see numbers like this.
Big time.
And I understand. I myself experienced the same thing when we received the notification earlier. But regardless, I do think that you talked about the TV deal. In the last podcast, I touched on the TV deal as well. And I think it's important to touch on it now because in 2025, new TV deal will be kicking in.
Right.
And it's roughly estimated to be about 3 times the amount that the deal is right now. And that's a ton of money being thrown into the league. That means that BRI will increase. That means that team cap salary cap will increase as well. And while this is an insane deal, I do feel like it won't be as hard of a it won't hit the cap sheets as hard as we think it would. Now, Damian Lillard, we expect that he will take a step back. This is the natural progression of a smaller guard himself, but he does take care of his body. He takes care, obviously he's one of the most skilled players in the league. Shooting, ages well, incredibly well. And I think he obviously has a high basketball IQ. I do think that he'll make up for it, but at the same time, it will act as an anchor somewhat towards their cap flexibility.
For sure. I mean, when you sign a guy to a Supermax contract, you're always considering the possibility that that hamstrings you in the future. So they have to consider that. But for a guy like Damian Lillard, here come the comments like, get out of there, man. Like, don't
run from the grind.
Run from the grind. That's what I was looking for. Run from the grind. Don't worry about loyalty.
Yeah.
Just let it go. But I mean, dollars say a lot, man. You can't discount the impact of the dollars. So, no hate whatsoever. I totally understand him accepting this deal and wanting to move forward with the Blazers. And they are doing their best to put the team around him that can really compete for a championship. Possibly here in the next few years. But before that, just looking at the details of this extension specifically, so in 2025, that's when this extension takes place.
Yep.
That's going to be worth about $58 million. And then the final year is going to be worth about $63.3 million. That's a player option. So, just really incredible numbers here. And to put this into perspective for you guys that are listening here, these are some of the numbers. And when it comes to his total lifetime earnings of $451 million. That is along the lines of guys like Kobe Bryant, Dirk Nowitzki, like guys that have made some serious money in their careers. So he's in the upper echelon of not just guys in general in terms of their level of play, but the contract value is incredible. And just that's a credit to Damian Lillard, what he's been able to do for this organization. He's been the pillar of the organization for over a decade now. He will be for the foreseeable future, and he's invested everything he can into this team. Now, the team is retooling a little bit here. They moved off of C.J. McCollum last year. They moved off of several, big-time contracts here, and they're going in a different direction slightly. So some other big moves that they made this offseason, Yusuf Nurkic was brought back on a 4-year, $70 million deal. So, that's pretty impactful here. There were some reports that he might be moving on to a new team, but they're keeping that starting center there in the fold. He's a solid guy. He had a little bit of a down year last year. He's working his way back from the injuries. But there's no debate that if Yusuf Nurkic is healthy, a great facilitator for his size, a great rebounder, deft touch, great footwork.
Yep.
So that's definitely an important signing here. And it looks like they're taking the dual route here when it comes to building this roster. First off with going through the trade route, going through to get Jeremy Grant, going through the re-signing route with Lillard and Nurkic. So they're not just going one route here. They're using various approaches to bring these guys back. But Yusuf Nurkic has been another pillar for this team for many, many years. And, I'm sure that, maybe they don't compete for a championship, right? Maybe they're not in the top echelon. But when you have Nurkic on that back line, you're going to be at least respectable, and you're going to be able to bang and go against some of the best centers in the league because he himself is a very large human being, and he brings a lot to the table. So there's a lot to dive into when it comes to that piece as well.
I agree, yeah. When you take a step back and think about the value of the deal, I'll be honest, I feel like it was a bit of an overpay. I was a bit surprised at the value, yearly value. It's at $17.5 million over 4 years. And I personally pegged him, and you may disagree, but he's roughly around $12 million a year. I think that, if you take the mid-level exception, which is what a lot of really great bigs get, on the market, he's a little better than that.
Sure.
He's a better passer. He's a solid defender. He could really only play one scheme, which is drop.
Yep.
When he's in position, he's a pretty good rim protector. He does use his body pretty well. He takes up space. Phenomenal rebounder. But I will say his finishing has dropped off a little bit. There are times where he isn't as aggressive. So I felt like maybe this was the chance that the Blazers replenish that position, the center position, and go for someone different and go for a different look. I felt like there will be times where they'll play Jeremy Grant at center. They'll go small. And I felt like, at the highest levels of the game, if you're going to play small, or you may get forced into playing small, I should say.
Yep.
Do you really want to spend $17.5 million on a starting center for 4 years?
Valid question.
And this isn't someone that's young. This isn't someone that has, a lot of potential or ability to grow into this contract. I would say that this was more of a rewarding contract, and he deserves it 100%. He's a great player, but I'll keep it at that. Great job by Rich Paul. Great job by Rich Paul.
Excellent job getting your guy paid, man. We can't hate at that. But yeah, I definitely do understand your concerns about Nurkic and his limitations.
Yes.
Maybe it's a slight overpay, but we have to keep in mind in this day and age in the NBA, if you re-sign a guy like that, as long as it's not Westbrook type contract.
Yep.
Because if you do that, I mean, you're just kind of shooting yourself in the foot. You don't have a lot of options as far as getting off of that contract. But if you bring Nurkic back I would say it's at least a reasonable number.
Yes.
Maybe it's not the ideal number,
Yes.
but it's reasonable. It's fair.
It is. You can understand why.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, it's a tradable contract. So I mean, it's firepower. If you want to go out there and make a deal for somebody, you want to go out there and maybe get the actual center that you want for long term. Maybe that's not Nurkic. I mean, that's a good amount of salary that you can use to bring somebody back.
Yeah.
Now, there are certain rules when it comes to trading. It's one of the things we like to do at NTC is really break these things down. The amount of money you can bring back in these contracts, it's tied to how much you send out.
Yep.
So with that contract that, like you were saying, about being about $17, $18 million annually, that increases what you can bring back. Now, if you re-sign him, and let's say it's like an Oladipo contract, it's 2 years, 8.5. You're limited in how much you can bring back. Yep. Also because the Blazers aren't that far from the tax. In fact, starting this season, everybody on the roster, I mean, they're over the tax slightly.
Yep.
So you're even more limited to, I believe, 125% of your outgoing salary.
Yep.
So with that in mind, if you're having Nurkic back, you want to pair with another contract, use that to bring back an impact player, you can do that. So I think they looked at him as, not to say that they don't value him whatsoever, but if they do find a center out there that might fit a little bit better for their team, that is some ammo that they can use to move off of him and find maybe that ideal center that you want to play for them long term. So
Absolutely.
Just wanted to point out the other side of the coin here, even though it might not be the best value in the
Absolutely.
league. It's just more firepower they can use maybe down the line a little bit.
Absolutely. And I do think that, this is something that I have to realize. This is, I feel like, something the NBA environment and fans have to realize. Like, we're so tied into, like, value this, value that.
Yep, every penny.
Sometimes we have to take a step back and realize, like, there's more context and nuance behind these contract negotiations that we are just not familiar about. And then also, Nurkic has been a great guy in Portland. He's been a pillar for them, and he's grown with them.
Absolutely. The Bosnian Beast is back,
The Bosnian Beast is back.
He's back for another 4 years, and we'll see how that kind of works out for him. Now, while we're on the subject of re-signings, we have another guy that was brought back on a pretty hefty deal, even more than Nurkic's deal, as reported here at the beginning of free agency period. So that player is Anthony Simons, coming back on a 4-year deal of his own worth $200 million. So for Anthony Simons, I mean, he's pretty much taking the spot of where CJ was in the rotation, that spark plug scorer, a guy that can create his own shot from really anywhere on the floor, from 2, from 3, side steps, step backs, explosive player. He's had small samples where he really went off and proved at himself to be a one-man show at times. Maybe not to the level of Damian Lillard, but in that ballpark. If we go back and look at the last 27 games that he played with the Blazers after the Damian Lillard injury, he averaged 23 points, 5 boards, 5.8 assists, 2.7 rebounds. His shooting splits were very strong at 46, 42, 87. So he shot over 40% from the field from 3, and then looking at his free throw percentage, almost 90%. So 60% true shooting is nothing to scoff at. Over a sample size that big.
Not at all.
7 games of 30-plus points, 2 games of 10-plus assists, 14 games of 5 or more made threes. So you look at the entire package, and Simons is a talent. The one criticism I do have on Simons, if he's watching this, we need you to work on this, my guy. He's so explosive. He's been in a dunk contest, for crying out loud. 40-plus inch vertical. Why don't we see that more often? I think I've seen him done maybe twice.
I have. It's so rare. He doesn't really attack the rim a lot.
That's true.
And
something he can improve upon going forward.
Absolutely, and that's why you see his free throw rate so low.
Yep.
But I do think that with an increased usage, with an increased responsibility, and with this contract now behind him, he's, I feel confident that that's going to be something that he feels comfortable with and adds to his game.
For sure.
And I do think that he's going to really grow into this contract. What we saw from last year was the real deal. I do think that, is he the perfect player? No, absolutely not. He has his flaws just like everyone else. Mm-hmm. But, at the same time, what you saw from him, in terms of, creating out of pick and roll, step backs, just he had a certain poise about himself, a certain patience about himself in pick and roll that we, saw him grow into this past year when Damian Lillard was hurt. And it'll be really nice to see and interesting to see whether or not how much they play together and how much they are staggered, because that was a conversation that was always had when CJ and Dame played together, how much they are staggered, how much they played together. And, I feel like this roster is designed with the Gary Payton signing, with Josh Hart coming back, Nasir Little growing into his role, Jeremy Grant. They have a lot of Swiss Army knife guys on the wing that can really play interchangeable roles, whether with Dame, whether with Anthony, whether both together on the court when they want to play small.
Sure.
So the team has a lot of lineup flexibility, and I really like that because that is something that they lacked in previous iterations of the Blazers.
Definitely. Another thing, you brought up the fact that, how much are they going to play together? How much are they going to be staggered?
Yep.
When it comes to their minutes distribution. I'm interested to see how that breaks down because here are two scenarios for you. Damian Lillard starts with Simons, two very explosive players. You're bringing in the next CJ McCollum, so to speak. Let's say they both averaged over 20 points a game. Lillard at 26, Simons at 21, 22. Let's say that happens. Fantastic offense. I think at worst you're going to be an average offense, if not better.
Yeah.
The question becomes, how do you get stops? As you mentioned, there are Swiss Army knives there at the wing, but they can't cover for just completely inept defensive guards.
Absolutely.
You're going to have holes there. So if those guys demonstrate that they can't really
get over a screen.
Yeah, exactly. They can't get through screens. They can't chase these guys around screens. You're put in a precarious position defensively.
Yep.
So alternatively, you start Dame, you start Josh Hart. Hart is a much better option when it comes to getting stops, getting the hustle plays. He averages, I want to say, maybe 6 rebounds a game for a guard.
Phenomenal
Crazy.
Transition, in transition as well.
Yes, absolutely. So, he attacks the rim very well, which Simons doesn't do all that well. So that's great. But the question then becomes, why do you re-sign Simons for $25 million a year? You're banking on him to become a better player. Yeah, sure, he can. He's very young at about 22 years old, I believe, as of today. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. But you don't re-sign a guy for that much money for him to come off the bench to be a sixth man.
Yeah.
That's obviously not the role that the Blazers envisioned for him.
Yep.
So I just wonder, what's the ideal pairing for them? Who starts? How many minutes does each guy play? Does Hart start at the 3?
Yeah.
You start those other guys, and then if they can't get stops, how do you adjust for that? I just feel like Simons is retreading old ground that they had done with CJ previously. He's younger, sure, but there are obvious holes when it comes to the defensive side of the ball that they have to address, and it could come back to bite them, and it could limit them from being an absolute elite team in the NBA.
Yeah.
Look at those teams in the playoffs, Ali, that we saw get to the finals, the Warriors and Celtics.
Yep.
Top 2 defenses.
Yep.
Not top 3, not top 5, top 2.
Nope.
So you got to have a good defense in order to be a championship team, and I'm just not sure if I see that kind of capability from the Blazers as they're currently constructed, bringing back Lillard, bringing back Simons to be the backcourt of the future.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on their defense because I do feel like they're going to be at best a middle of the pack defense.
Yep.
At best.
I think that's it might actually be a little bit generous depending on how those two guys hold up.
Yep, I agree.
So that's just something I'm looking at, and it could be a little bit of a concerning story. So one last player I wanted to touch on, and we kind of teased at this a little bit already, but Jeremy Grant being on this team now, the trade was made for him. What they gave up is basically draft rights to an overseas player, a 2025 first-round pick via Milwaukee, a 25 second-round pick, and a 26 second-round pick. So basically picks and draft rights for Jeremy Grant. So, they didn't give up a whole lot for him, obviously, but it's definitely something that hopefully they can make good on and be a competitive team. You don't bring in Jeremy Grant just to go back to the lottery. You just don't do that. He's supposed to be one of the missing pieces for you. He's supposed to be one of those guys that helps get you over the top. So we're going to have to keep a close eye on this team and see how he works in tandem with those other players. I think he brings exactly what they needed. This is what they tried to do with Robert Covington not too long ago to man the defense. Covington isn't a great on-ball defender. He's more of an off-ball guy. And Covington is older. Covington is not as versatile when it comes to different coverages and defense.
Yep.
And he's not as versatile on offense. So Jeremy Grant is 110% an upgrade over him. But I'm curious to see how that works out. And what happens next year when he's a free agent and he's looking for another raise?
Yeah.
Do you give him 25+ mil? and he's going to be looking for serious money if he comes up this season and does a great job. So how do you feel he fits in for this team? Maybe not this season, but in the following years. This is definitely a risky move because you're looking at tying up a ton of money into 3 guys and locking up a core that may not be able to compete for a championship, which is probably what you want to do with Damian Lillard re-signed for all these years, right?
They are unfortunately, in a vacuum. Jeremy Grant, phenomenal player. Anthony Simons, phenomenal player.
Definitely.
Nurkic, great player. Josh Hart, great player.
No doubt.
You go down the list of their roster, they have awesome, really good players, just well-rounded players. But they have locked themselves into the situation that they were in the previous iteration
Exactly.
of the Blazers.
Exactly. We've seen this story before.
We've seen this story before, and that's the unfortunate case. I would say that I think that they're going to have a successful year. I'm quite optimistic.
Well, what's the definition of like a solid year? I think that's the question. And is
That's a great
is that
question.
35 wins? Is it 40, 45?
45 plus wins.
Yeah.
I think they get. And here's the thing, man. The West is going to be an absolute bloodbath this year. You
It's
got the
deep.
Nuggets coming back full healthy. You got the Warriors. They've missed some pieces. They've had some veterans leave, and that's okay. But, they got some young guys stepping up. Obviously, Moses Moody, we saw today.
Yep.
He's hungry.
34.
Yes, sir.
Well, last I checked, you could have more now.
You could have more now. And you got the Clippers coming back. And you got the Lakers are trying to make moves. You got teams coming back hungry. And I do worry that they will find themselves in the middle of the pack or at the end of the pack. Maybe fighting for a play-in. Maybe fighting for a playoff spot. Who knows? But life comes at you fast.
That's true. Definitely in the Western Conference, as you mentioned. I mean, the Timberwolves on the coming up. There's definitely a lot of viable competitors in this conference, so we're going to have to keep an eye on this team, but at least give them credit for attempting to come out here and build a solid roster around Damian Lillard. They were reported to be in talks about a trade for OG Anunoby, which I think that would be another great acquisition. They still have some draft picks in their possession. They do have some tradable contracts, so they may not be done. Let's keep an eye on them as they enter the offseason, the rest of the offseason, because something tells me that another move or two could be down the pipeline as Lillard is back. So they obviously want to make good on that investment and gain these guys back to make another deep run in the playoffs.
Yep.
So that's going to conclude our discussion here, everybody, on this iteration of the NTC podcast. Thanks so much for joining us here live in Vegas. We're going to be here over the next few days covering some more of these stories, having some exceptional guests right here at this desk at the Thomas and Mack Center. So if you're looking for some great stories, some great feedback from some great individuals in this field, don't miss out. We'll be here in Vegas for another few days here, covering the action for you as it unfolds. And be sure to keep it locked also on NoTradeClause.com. We will have a variety of resources for you guys to check out, such as our cap sheets, our draft capital page, our transaction log. We'll be updating that as we're here in Vegas, keeping you guys updated on whatever signings, whatever trades transpire here during the summer months. So thanks so much, guys, for joining us on this iteration. We'll be back here, as I said, over the next few days covering this content for you, and we're going to have a great time while doing it. So enjoy the rest of this action in Vegas, and we'll be coming back at you for another iteration of the bot here real soon. Take care, guys.
Take care, y'all.